Wolf Pack. What's going on? It's your boy, the Wolf of Rose Street. RoseStreetJournal.com. We breed and feed you fantasy wolves here with your Week 9 Waiver Wire Show. Happy Halloween to all of you out there. Hopefully you're having a fun, spooky day. Lots of candy, trick-or-treating with kids, whatever it might be. I hope you had a good one. Now it's time to also stock up on those top pickups of the week. So let's waste no time and dive right in because we got a bunch of them for Week 9, including a few that I could see genuinely swinging leagues down the stretch run, both as stashes, but also guys you can toss right into your lineups and trust. So let's dive in. First, I got to talk about Will Levis and his huge debut this last week. Now, quarterbacks I don't typically have in the top 10, and he's no exception. There is a little bit of downside we'll talk about, but man, it's tough to discount the fact that Will Levis went 19 of 29, 238 yards, and 4 touchdowns in his first NFL action. Crazy stuff for him. You got to go check this out. If you're QB needy, you don't typically get smash debuts like this. He also had 7 rushes for 11 yards. Interestingly enough, 6 of those were designed rushing attempts, and that's really important. A lot of people comparing Will Levis for the howitzer arm for some plus mobility. Actually averaged more rush yards per game in college than Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. A lot of people drew your poor man's Josh Allen type of comparisons here for him. And we did see that type of big play upside, that type of mobility, the broken plays in the pocket and still able to let it sling. I'm not saying he's even close to Josh Allen or what his career will be, but the fact that he has a similar skill set that has yielded such huge fantasy goodness for people in the past, that yielded him, Will Levis himself, 26.6 fantasy points this last week, is definitely an intriguing sign that if you lost Kirk Cousins, that if you are just streaming QBs week to week, go out and check for him. He actually has, Will Levis, the 6 best quarterback schedule remaining. So definitely a guy to go out there, check out, see if he's out there in your leagues. An absurd 12.3 average depth of target as well. So they were letting Will Levis sling, and he certainly was up to the occasion. A couple red flags have to be. One, how was this even a competition between him and Malik Willis? Why was that going to be a split entering this week? How could he not have earned this job sooner? I don't know. I don't really care at this point because just passing the eyeball test on the real-life NFL field, we had him killing it, Will Levis. But you also got to keep in mind that only 3 of his non-TD throws went for first downs. Ultimately was not consistently moving the chains. He's not a guarantee to keep the job should they want to go back to Tamm Hill. I don't think they do that. I imagine he played well enough, and they do have this season pretty much with the eyes towards the future, the Titans do. So I don't think it will go backtracking, and it's not, but just one of those things, you got to have a little bit of red tape with Will Levis's name, despite the humongous upside we saw from this guy in his debut. Now, Wolfpack, if you're watching out here, we're about to dive into our top 10 pickups. Please do consider that thumbs up button, whether you're here with us live, whether you're catching the replay, like, shares, retweets, all that good stuff. It really does help us grow so much. We're making that climb towards 4K, about 3,500 of you. We're growing about 100 new people this month. It's been awesome to see, but please do consider helping us continue to grow here as we now dive into my top 10. And we're about to rip through now, starting with Jaden Reed, a handful of receivers that now we hit these bye-week crunches here could really help you get through that and navigate these tricky waters. We'll start with Reed, though, 17% roster. I think about 3 to 4% is all you'll need to put in to get him. Maybe even nothing, given that he's off a lot of people's radars. He had a couple big booms early in the year, was a little bit quiet, but after this week, 88% route share. That actually led the team this week, more than Christian Watson, more than Romeo Doubs, and he ultimately racked up a team high 12 fantasy points, ranking as a fringe wide receiver 3 in the process. 15% target share, 12.3 fantasy points, and they've got the Packers a very, very favorable passing game schedule coming up here. So Jaden Reed certainly seems to be, I know how bad Jordan Love's floundering at this point, but he seems to be the preferred target, those higher percentage throws out of the slot, while also still getting deep. 15.8 average depth of target this last week too, and barely missed yet another touchdown. I really, really like Jaden Reed moving forward. But if you don't need the immediate usability, you want a little bit more upside, Quentin Johnston, 19% rostered, putting his best day together as a professional, season high, 15.9% target share, 69% snap share, 68% route share. NFL puts up 5 catches for 50 yards, also season highs this last week. And anytime you get a first round talent, especially at wide receiver, starting to see an uptick in that usage and production, starting to be on the field more, you got to take note, because historically we've seen it time and time again. Rookie receivers start to take off for the second half of the season. Josh Palmer continues to get banged up. It's only a matter of time. It seems he's screaming in the medical tent was the tweet we got over here. He did return, but definitely was less effective, Josh Palmer, than usual. He was outproduced by Quentin Johnston this last week. Maybe we'll start to see him get used more and more as the season goes on. I certainly think so. I think there's room for this role to grow. It is a little off-putting that the Chargers using this guy deep down the field as a contested test guy. That's not his skill set. It seems like it should be as a 6'3" guy, fast game speed, 4.57, not the fastest 40, but he can blaze down the field. And with that size, you'd think he'd be a better contested test guy. He only had 3 red zone touchdowns and had one of the lower contested catch rates in football. That's why I was a little down on him as a prospect. But what he does very, very well, he was actually only behind Deebo Samuel in the last few classes of wide receivers in yards after the catch per route run. He is insanely elite after the catch. And we saw it. That quick dig route where he just broke like 3 tackles, juked a few guys out after the catch. He moves much better than a guy his size typically does and should. So I really like Quentin Johnston. If they can start using him this way, he could be thriving with more design screens and some of those layup targets. That's his actual bread and butter. You hope that we don't keep seeing a round peg jammed in this square hole here, flipping those 2 around. That's just because I feel that they're jamming it this way. They flipped exactly what he should be doing, but at least worth a stash right now. It's one of the best pass games in the entire NFL. You don't need me to hype that one up any further. Now, Khalil Shakir, if you need an immediate plug-in wide receiver, I really, really like Shakir as a streamer this week and also potentially a long-term play should the Bills continue rolling out these 3 wide receiver sets. The first game with Dawson Knox, they were much more up-tempo. They almost exclusively used that 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers. And beyond Kincaid, who of course benefited, had a huge day without Knox, Shakir was the next clearest beneficiary of this. Season high in route, 72%. 6 targets was good for 15% share. Yards, 92. That was actually a team high. The role was already growing. Week 7, 43% of the routes, 4 targets the week before, but then he responds even bigger here in week 8, 15.2 PPR fantasy points. Again, the team high receiving share there. I think he's absolutely in flex play this week against Cincinnati, who's giving up the 3rd highest target share to slot receivers per fantasy points data. And then we also have Denver the week after that, who are also much more susceptible to receivers. Definitely give Shakir a look if they continue it. And why wouldn't they? Up tempo, best offense. This offense has looked in weeks. It's more resembling of the attacks we've seen in the past for Buffalo. I would absolutely be intrigued to add Khalil Shakir after this week's usage. But of all these kind of 4 to 5% bid guys, I would actually up my bid and prioritize of all of them, Demario Douglas. Let's talk about this kid a little bit. He had a gaudy 28% target per route run over his collegiate career at Liberty. And then bam, this last week, 84% of routes, 77% snap share, 22% target share, team high 7 looks in week 8. Those are all season highs. He started even with Juju back these past couple of weeks. And now we got Kendrick Bourne out for the season. Unfortunately, back-to-back wide receiver 9-10 days, started the game with a touchdown. Bourne looked like he was going to be a monster for the rest of the season. Devastating injury, one of the only playmakers doing anything for this just completely abysmal Patriots attack. So Douglas stepped in afterwards, 24% targets per route run, and was the clear Patriots wide receiver 1. Didn't do a ton with it, only 25 yards on his 5 catches. But ultimately, and you got to imagine, touchdowns probably not going to be huge here, but he should be a true alpha wide receiver from here on out, at minimum 7 to 8 looks on a weekly given basis. And I think we can get at least low-end wide receiver 3 steady production from here on out from Demario Douglas. He was hyped all preseason as the guy in the New England attack. We've seen them churn out slot product after slot product. You can hate Bill Belichick for all you want with his receiving judgment. I would 100% agree with you as a Patriots fan, but the one thing they've done well is pick out these slot receivers. So Demario Douglas has that a pop for a reason. And I really, really like this kid. 7 to 10% FAAB. I could see him being a reliable, especially in PPR leagues, down the stretch run here for you. Get those questions on in Wolfpack. Would love to answer them as you continue here. And of course, again, that thumbs up button is so greatly appreciated. That wraps up some of those early receivers. We got a couple more names for you at the position, but that's how I would sift through again. Jaden Reed, Quentin Johnson, Khalil Shakir, Demario Douglas. Let's talk about a rec who I want to like more. I want to keep buying. I called him fool's gold last week. That's Mario DiMarcado, 37% rostered, and I still think worth about 7 to 10% FAAB. Talk about the pros and cons of this kid. He has been the clear-cut lead back now 3 out of the past 4 weeks, and certainly back-to-back weeks. And that's what I really needed to see, because we've seen them in James Conner's absence here. Go Keontae Ingram, DiMarcado, Ingram again. It's been all over the place. But we finally now have back-to-back samples where he has handled 20 of 24 rush attempts, and then 13 of 14 rush attempts. So 83% and 93% of the running back rush share in back-to-back weeks. I can feel confident in saying DiMarcado for at least one more week will be that lead back. Now, that is the rub and why you don't want to blow everything to go get him, because James Conner is eligible to come off that IR in week 10. Doesn't mean he's going to. We have no real updates, no reports yet on how he is doing with that knee injury, but he could be back as early as next week. And that's why it's still in that fool's gold territory here with DiMarcado. Definitely can start him this last week, despite getting all these opportunities, 18 and 21 these past 2 weeks. That's featured back workloads. He's only been okay with a 9.5 fantasy points per game average. He does look solid enough. He does pass the eyeball test. In my opinion, always going forward, quality receiver out of the backfield. Doesn't do anything overly special, but does consistently fall forward and churn yards. And with Kyler Murray potentially back as early as this week, could get even more volume in production. But it is against Cleveland. You got to keep that in mind as well. One of the trickier front sevens to ever want to navigate there. Tougher defense here. They could just swallow up this Cardinals team as a whole, but you know you're at least getting the lead back. 67% of the team rush attempts, 56% snap share this past week. Definitely getting the lead back, but not a guy, again, I'm going all in for. In fact, let's move on to a running back. Here's a running back that I would much rather prioritize. Even if I can't use him this week, I can see a much more longer tail upside being there with Leonard Fournette, only 5% rostered, and I think he is worth at least 10 to 12% of your FAAB. If you're not in win now mode, if you have the ability to be patient here, I think stashing big old Lenny could win some leagues down the run here. Let's just look at Latavius Murray here, top 25 in red zone carries and top 4 in inside the 5 attempts, and yet he has been stopped at the 1 yard line and failed to score a touchdown on 4 of his team high, almost league high, 8 attempts, stuffed 4 times at the 1 yard line. That is absurd, insanely inefficient, and any eyeballs can see just how bad Latavius Murray looks. I imagine Leonard Fournette, as soon as this week, and definitely within the next 2 weeks or so, will have that Latavius Murray role on lockdown, and that's been 41% of the snaps these last 3 weeks, 30% of the rushing attempts, a handful of targets mixed in there. What does Lenny do better than anybody that was at least available on the waiver wire? We've seen it the last couple of weeks, score touchdowns, always efficient at the goal line, but also catching the ball. In fact, he has the 3rd and 4th highest receiving yards these past 2 seasons among running backs. He's the running back 4 and running back 15 in points per game the past 2 years. Now, I know this is going to be a much different. I don't expect him to be that Lenny absorbing all the entire volume that made him such a valuable cog in that Tampa Bay attack. But I do think this is a guy that can be a Latavius Murray times 100, because that's how bad Latavius Murray is. Damian Harris, there's no real updates on what he's been. I do think this does hurt James Cook, just for what it's worth, and talking about the overall fantasy impact, to have a similar back role behind him that's actually much more productive. We'll see. And maybe Lenny just gained a ton of weight and is not looking great. We've seen it before from him in the past, but without seeing him with the eyeball test, all the reports were he's in solid shape and looked great in his tryouts. So we will find out. We will see for real soon enough. But I expect this to be a very similar to what you're kind of getting out of Kareem Hunt right now. The receptions, the TDs, and just a much more prolific offense, not quite the workload that Hunt's getting. I do think James Cook will stay around that 60% guy, but man, you got to be a bit more concerned here with Lenny added. I might still try to buy James Cook if his owner's panicking right now over this move, but if anything happened to James Cook as well, you have this type of 3-down horse behind him too. So there's a lot of just regular upside if nothing happens, and this is the Lenny we get in a Latavius Murray role. Plenty of upside there, but you also have that handcuff with benefits upside. We know playoff Lenny has that ring with him as well. The team is welcoming in this type of proven product, and I think they're going to really use him. So I'm much higher than consensus on Leonard Fournette. I do not think this is just a fool's gold type of addition by any means. We talked about 4 wide receivers earlier, but if I had one guy to prioritize at the position on this week's waiver wire, that would be Rasheed Shaheed. 37% rostered. He has had a mammoth wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 8 finish in 2 of his last 3 games. Now, he is a bit inconsistent. We all know that with Shaheed. He had a wide receiver 12 finish to start the year at 21 points. This last week, 24.3 points, a 20-point day in week 6. But other than that, wide receiver 54, 117, 59, 62, 52. It is boom or bust. And he does definitely profile much more of a best ball monster product. But he's trending the right way over his recent history right now. Plus, he's got the Bears and Vikings in weeks 9 and 10. Great matchups for wide receivers, in particular, guys that can get deep. If you're rolling the decks for the dice on a flex play, why not shoot for the guy that can get you 25 out of your flex? It's the only guy that Derek Carr seemingly can connect with deep down the field, and Shaheed makes play after play. This was the case last year in terms of air yards and converted receiving yards per target. He's consistently been towards the top league since entering it as a rookie last year. That's carried over in this year when he's now the 5th most points above expectation at the wide receiver position. Just efficiency has been through the roof nonstop this year, nonstop last year. And it does seem like his role could be getting a little bit more consistent. We've seen more snaps over the last 3 weeks than he previously had over his 4 games before that. So I like, if you're taking a dice roll, a stab at your flex, you could do a whole lot worse than a wide receiver that could just win you a week. And even the bust, 6.3, 4 point, they haven't been completely ruin your week type of busts either. Now, I also think a top 3 pickup this week on the same team, Tamm Hill, 35% rostered. And if I had to pick one Saint to prioritize, it would be Hill, largely because of the position he plays. We know tight end is just about a barren wasteland with very little consistency. Week to week opportunities are so tough to come by at the tight end position. Yet Tamm Hill, let's talk about his last 3 weeks. Top 3 tight ends in full PPR fantasy scoring in that span. Travis Kelce, 69.1. Tamm Hill, 51.5 points. And then TJ Hawkinson, 51.4 points. Yes, the tight end 2 across his last 3 games is Mr. Tamm Hill. Week 6, 12.5 points. Tight end 6, 8 targets, 7 catches, 49 yards, in addition to a carry for 2 yards, 12.3 points. Not bad for a PPR tight end. Tight end 6 that week. Next week after that, week 7, 16.8 points, given 4 catches, 50 yards, plus a rushing TD and 18 yards, 10 total opportunities. Another great day. Juwan Johnson returns this past week, which was the big concern. How's he going to be involved? Doesn't matter. Actually, 22.9, even more points for Tamm Hill. The tight end 3 this last week. 1 catch for 14 yards, but a whopping 9 attempts, 63 yards, and 2 touchdowns there. 10, 10, and 9 opportunities these last 3 weeks. Tight end 6, tight end 6, tight end 3. And again, the second highest scoring tight end across the last 3 weeks span. And he's out there in nearly 70% of leagues. Definitely worth 15, 20% of your FAAB if you're needy at the position. As a guy I would prioritize. We're going to talk about him momentarily. But Tamm Hill, I love this usage. I love that it continued even with Juwan Johnson back. So I think Tamm Hill warrants all the consideration if you need a tight end. My number 2 pickup of the week, moving back to running backs. And again, not a guy that you necessarily want to start right away, but that tells you just how much ceiling breaking upside I think Zack Charbonnet has. 42% rostered. And the fact that I don't even believe you can just toss him right in your laps, and yet he's still worth 30, 35% of your FAAB, gives you an idea of how big of a league winner I could see Zack Charbonnet being if the circumstances arise. And I also bid that up a little bit because I do think there's some handcuff with benefits upside to Zack Charbonnet. He was the Number 4 pickup for me last week, and he really showed why. In fact, he actually had 59% of the snaps outsnapped Kenneth Walker, outproduced him fantasy points-wise, was the running back 30 compared to the running back 32 for Kenneth Walker. He played every single third down, Zack Shanet, for this team, every single 2-minute drill snap. He also got more short yardage snaps than Kenneth Walker. If he starts to siphon that type of work, that's significant. That's what we just talked about with like Leonard Fournette and Kareem Hunt. Those high premium touches here were going to Zack Charbonnet, and he was doing a ton of damage with it. He ultimately had 5 carries for 53 yards, over 10 yards a pop on it, had 11 yards on his 2 catches, and we had, after the game, Pete Carroll said, they were asking, was this a Kenneth Walker injury or what was going on here with Zack Charbonnet? And he said, we just wanted to make sure to he got in there, had a chance to contribute. He looked very good, blocking, running the football, catching the football. We were fortunate to have both those guys, and he just gets it, said Pete Carroll. Game comes easy to him. He understands. He's very disciplined, very accountable kid, does exactly how you tell him, adapts to the flow of things, makes the right choices. He's hard-nosed in blitz pickup and pass protection, not afraid to throw his body in there, hasn't had a problem at all. He's very physical in it, and these things that are hard to do, he does better than your typical rookie. And then he finished his quote off by saying, this is a full-body guy. He can run, he can catch, he can block, he can do it all. He's an all-around player we can really trust, and we will trust him and continue to do so. And that just suggests that this role is not going away. It might only go up and up. So you got to be a little concerned if you're a Kenneth Walker owner, and certainly get encouraged if you have Charbonnet or if he's out there in your waiver wire. I think he is that handcuff with benefits to the moon, because if something happens to Walker, we know he's got that lingering calf injury. This is one of very few. Most years, there's probably 5-6 guys that if the number 1 running back goes down, you could really lean on those guys in fantasy for some solid production. And then there's usually about 4 guys that 20-plus point upside should the start to go down. Charbonnet might be on a list with maybe only Tyjae Spears. Of course, you got the Jahmyr Gibbses and Jalen Warrens who are already highly owned, but there's really no elite handcuffs this year besides Charbonnet and Spears, and they're still out there in over half of leagues. So definitely go look for Charbonnet. I think you got to bid whatever you have to, because with those lingering injuries, we know Walker has dealt with that in the past as well. I think it's only a matter of time till Charbonnet is making starts. And if he is in this offense, we talked about it last week with Kenneth Walker, 8th most carries, 6th most fantasy points, top 5 in rushing in the red zone. This is an elite role, and I think Charbonnet has that 3-down skill set. Pete Carroll already talked about him having that elite 3-down skill set that would make him a bona fide RB1 should he take over the role. Now let's wrap up Wolfpack to my number 1 waiver wire pick of the week. Again, if you don't mind hitting that thumbs up button, like, shares, retweets, it really does help us so much. Only 15, 20 of you here. We usually have 40. Missing the crowd tonight. I don't know where everybody is, the energy. Maybe it's Halloween. That's where you guys are at. But it's going to be tough to keep doing this if this is the crowd. So please do help us out, Wolfpack. That thumbs up, everything. If you enjoy it, please let me know in the comments. That stuff does go a long way to boost the ego a little bit. It really does help, because it is that grind part of the season. And hey, if we need weeks off, we need nights off, we need more from you to keep growing this thing. So please do help your guy out. But let's talk about now my number 1 pickup of the week. No surprise, Trey McBride, 22% rostered. I think you got to bid 35, maybe even 50% of your FAAB health. You need a tight end that bad. Maybe ship it all for Trey McBride. I have him as a top 7 rest of season tight end. I do not think this was a fluke, but let's dive in to why I think this guy could be a true bona fide season-winning tight end moving forward. We joked last week, we talked about him. He was maybe the pickup 9, I believe, on the list. Him and Tamm Hill, 9 and 8. Both of them clearly getting bumps up. But we joked that, all of Ertz's target share, that can't go all to Trey McBride, right? This team does rank 3rd in tight end target share, 31% entering this last week. It can't just all go to Trey McBride. No, actually more went to him. 38.9% target share, the highest single game target share a tight end has logged all year, more than anything Travis Kelce has even done. That was because of a team high 14 targets, 88% of the routes, 83% of the snaps, compared to a previous season high of 58%. The role upgrade was massive. The usage could not have been better. Truly, again, nobody saw a better target share this entire season than what Trey McBride just did this last year. And a whopping 46% of those were first read targets. They were drawing these plays up to go and get him the rock, and all he did was continue to thrive. We talked about this last week as well. he still remains Trey McBride behind only Travis Kelce in yards per route run, 2.26, one of the most predicted efficiency metrics that is out there. All of this combined for a whopping 25.5 fantasy points. He had one of the more impressive touchdowns, pushing through a huge host of people. And you might say, oh, it's a clear 1 week fluke. Tight ends will ever do this. Well, he had 90 catches and over 1,100 yards in college, had 46.5% of Colorado State's yards and touchdowns for a dominating rating that ranked in the 99th percentile of tight end. So, yeah, we've seen him shoulder attacks before. The question does become, Kyler Murray, what's this going to look like? Last year, they didn't hit it off too well, but ultimately, the new play caller, the scheme certainly seems to revolve around the tight end. I am a huge fan of Trey McBride moving forward. Yeah, I don't expect 25 fantasy points every week, but I do think a consistent 10 to 15 is well within his range of outcome. I do think we're going to get 7 to 10 looks every single week as the clear number 2 target behind maybe only Marquise Brown, maybe the number 1 target in this offense moving forward. Huge fan here of Trey McBride. And that wraps up every single one of my top 10 waiver wire pickups. Wolfpack, as we always do, we're going to move into now our defensive streamers. And again, one call for that thumbs up button. Free, simple way to support your boy. Really appreciate it here as I'm burning this oil here for you before Halloween. Now, talking about my top week 9 defensive streamers, it's going to be a really tricky week because usual top units like Dallas face the Eagles this week. The Bills get Cincinnati. The Cowboys, the Eagles themselves, good defense that you typically rely on. The Chiefs get Miami. All these defenses that you typically kind of just set and forget are facing the best of offenses this week. So we probably have a lot more people begging for some defensive streamers. Now, the first game I kind of want to target for that is Atlanta facing Minnesota. Atlanta, the home team, I think edges out the priority, but there's a few reasons why you might consider Minnesota ahead of them. In fact, I kind of want to go Minnesota. Let's talk about both of them, though. You got Atlanta, who, yeah, they didn't do a whole ton this last week, but they get Jaren Hall, BYU last round pick here, day 3. He's going to be making his debut against a hostile Atlanta crowd on the road. And Falcons, yeah, they haven't had the big plays, a ton of turnovers, any touchdowns yet this year. They quietly, though, rank 6th in the league in yardage allowed right now, 8th total against the pass. This is going to be a hard time for Jaren Hall to walk in and move this ball against him. We know how bad the Vikings run game is, too. And Atlanta, yeah, they lost Grady Jarrett, but they've been the 2nd hardest team to run on in football so far this year. So this is a solid overall defense that hasn't had the big plays, but leave it to Jaren Hall, who did have a turnover 6 to welcome himself to the NFL this last week. I could definitely see that going the Falcons' way. But Minnesota, on the other side of things, don't discredit them. In fact, over the last 5 weeks, I couldn't believe this stat. Over the last 5 weeks, Minnesota ranks number 1 in total fantasy points for defenses, averaging nearly 12 points per game. 10, 8, 21, 2, and 17 points in their last 5 games. And that 2-point dud came against the Chiefs. That's what you'd expect. I tell you, we're never using them in that week anyways. And largely that has come on the back of Hunter, the number 1 leader in sacks in the NFL right now. They have 5, 5, and 4 sack efforts mixed into that 5-week span. They have 2 defensive touchdowns across that span. So this is an opportunistic defense that is getting to the passer. They have not been surrendering a ton of points. And Atlanta has given up the 7th most points to defenses. Then you also have New Orleans, Denver, and Chicago heading into Minnesota's bye. So you have a pretty decent schedule where you might not have to play defensive roulette here. And you also have Desmond Ridder. That would make this even more palatable because you know how often he's turning over the ball. Should they go to Heineke, which is what they should do, and all the tea leaves suggest they will, it becomes a little bit less of a palatable outcome here. But I ultimately, if it is Ridder, I would go Minnesota as the top defense, no questions asked. Should it be Heineke? It's not like he's this elite quarterback that's going to light the scoreboard on fire here. He's a little bit more competent, probably protects the ball a little bit better, but he had plenty of turnovers for the Commanders last year, took plenty of sacks as well. So I actually prefer Minnesota, my number 1 stream of the week at defense, but Atlanta a close second. Both of them follow my top 8 defenses for the week. Behind them, you got to consider the Raiders, 14% coming off a 13-point day on Monday Night Football against the Lions. Really solid team. Yeah, that was buoyed by a defensive touchdown here, but they've had some really solid plays, and a lot of that is attributed to Max Crosby, maybe the defensive player in the entire league, defensive player of the year. He'd have my vote, honestly, if that mattered for anything. But they also get the Giants this next week. -9 passing yards last week. I do think it sounds like Daniel Jones will be back, but I mean, yeah, you'd rather them be facing Tommy DeVito as a defense, but Daniel Jones has been a complete and utter bag of dirt this entire year. So I think the Raiders are in a great spot. This is a team that ranks 32nd in points per game, 32nd in yards per game, 32nd in yards per play. They're horrible. It's one of the worst offenses we've seen in years. So ultimately, Waller could also be out with a hamstring, so they might be even more banged up with even less weaponry. And this, again, Max Crosby, they are tied right now, the Giants, with the Commanders only, with an NFL high 41 sacks allowed. And it's just one bad hit, that neck injury for Daniel Jones, one bad hit away from another Tommy DeVito experience, again, -9 passing yards. So I really do like them. In terms of high floor options, though, this might be even safer here. Facing Tampa Bay at home, they have not allowed more than 21 points since week 2. They had 6 sacks against the Panthers last week. That D-line is absolutely coming into form, and it's on high floors. 13, 12, 4, 10, and 7 points across their last 5 games, a top 8 unit in that span. And Baker, always a fair bet for some turnovers and bozo type plays. So I don't hate the Texans. Last defense I did want to shout out was the Packers, getting the Rams here, largely because you're getting Brett Ripien starting for Matt Stafford. And they have 9, 2, and 7 points in their last 3. So they've been solid, this Packers unit. Great pass defense that should definitely be opportunistic, picking off Brett Ripien at home. Of course, if Matt Stafford ends up doing the unthinkable and playing, wouldn't like the Packers nearly as much, but they are a top 10 unit for me as well this week. I wanted to like the Patriots facing the Commanders. Again, the league high 41 sacks, 5th most points allowed to the defense, this Washington team. But just since losing Judon and Christian Gonzalez, they really have such a lack of playmakers on this Patriots team. They haven't topped 5 points since week 3. If they're ever going to do it, it'd be a week like this week, but that's a distant 6th option. You have 5 other options that are well ranked ahead of them for me. And again, Minnesota, 9% rostered, more likely to be out there anyways. That's where I would be leaning myself. That wraps up our defensive streamers. That wraps up our top 10 pickups of the week. So on to any questions that we have compiled here. Again, Wolfpack would greatly appreciate that thumbs up button, like, shares, get us out to more people. Please do help us out. It is, for whatever reason, the numbers, and it is this time of year too. People start to fall out of their leagues and things go down. So we really do rely on you guys to keep us buoyed up in this time of the year as people start to fall off the season. We need to get some new faces, new names in here, and then you guys can greatly, greatly help us out there by both hitting the thumbs up button and also sharing, getting it out to more people. I would really, really appreciate it. Campanelli asking, would you rather have Levis, Minshew, or Daniel Jones this week? You have to cut Jones. I'd probably just go to Levis at this point. I think Daniel Jones is one hit away from being shut down for the season. It hasn't looked great anyway, so what's the point of even holding on to him? I'd rather have Levis. 4 touchdowns in his debut. Pittsburgh give the 3rd most points to quarterbacks as well. So you get a good smash spot on Thursday Night Football too. You get to watch that. Who knows? Again, we'd already outlined, Campanelli, some of those red flag with Levis, but in terms of ceiling, to me, he's significantly higher than all these. Minshew, the highest floor here, 14 to 15 weekly points, but I'd rather go for that ceiling. I'd rather go to Levis. Tyler asking, is McBride good with the new QB? We'll find out. He did have a 7-catch, 20-point fantasy day with Kyler Murray at one point, so maybe, but that's got to be wait to see. I do think it's less about playing with the right QB and more about this offense has just been crafting so many plays to go to the tight end. Like we said, 48% first read target share. It's a staple of this offense. So I think he is going to remain just fine. A better quarterback playing. Sure, that might mean a few more deep shots and more long developing play than the quick hits we've seen going to the tight ends out of Josh Dobbs. I still think McBride is going to be the firm number 2 target in this offense moving forward, with or without Kyler Murray, whoever's the quarterback. I'm not worried. I think a good quarterback, honestly, can only help his touchdown chances. What's going on, Lomi? Thoughts about Hawkinson? I know they got Dobbs, but I've heard the same backups. So this week it's gonna be Jaron Hall. They have all the. It's gonna be so quick to get Josh Dobbs acclimated to this team. So I think rest of the season, he's an obvious top 3 tight end. This week, though, I do have him a little bit lower. I believe I ranked him as the tight end 6, 7. A lot of times it ends up actually working in the tight end's favor when they get a rookie signal caller that just wants to get it out quick, get the safe play, and they play a little tighter than the Kirk Cousins might play here. So I wouldn't be overly concerned. I am worried. I mean, it's certainly not going to be Cousins. It's going to be a big drop-off. There's no doubt about that, but he's become Hawkinson such a staple here. You can expect 10, 12 targets. I expect that. Yeah. Lomi, worries about Bijan? Yeah, I'm worried. Have him, Kamara, Kyron, Warren, Singletary, Akers. Should I look to take Bijan, go get, I mean, yeah, if you could move Bijan for JT and Godwin, absolutely, I would be doing that. I'd rather have probably JT straight up than Bijan, as long as he's healthy. I don't know what happened there at the end of the game. But I would not be afraid to sell Bijan. Just Arthur Smith, such a bozo. Like, I don't want to have to deal with that experience if I don't have to, no matter how talented the guy is. Fourth in the league, should I sell? Yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely sell Bijan again. Happy Halloween. Thank you, Mike. Same to you. What do you think about Jaren Hall this week? I don't want to play him, that's for sure. What can we know? He's okay at BYU. He get a little bit mobility there to him too, but I have zero expectation. I certainly don't want to start him. I'm a bit worried for all my products there. Thoughts on DJ? With and without Fields, he hasn't been too hot. Should I try to package with DJ? Are you talking about Daniel Jones? I don't even know who you're talking about. Sorry. I don't know who you mean by DJ. Sorry, Lomi. Would you drop Jaren or Singletary to add Fournette? Yep, I drop Singletary. They got Mike Boone involved this week. So I do think Singletary is probably the back to own there in Houston. But if this becomes a three-headed nightmare, it's not really a great run environment right now anyways. I think Singletary can be dropped because I think you're stashing them both anyways. I like Michael Wilson and a big, cute quarterback coming. If I had 12 names on this list, he was going to be the next man up, Lomi. I do like Michael Wilson playing a ton of snaps, running a lot of routes. We've seen big glimpses. Can get the big play done, can do it in the red zone, can do it after the catch. I really like Michael Wilson with a quarterback coming. I'd rather have Shakir myself, but if this is just pure stash, you want to use somebody this week or next, it might be worth just seeing what Michael Wilson does once Murray's here. I think we're going to have to wait yet another week, and I don't really care to see him with Clayton Tune right now. But if you don't need to use Shakir this week, I prefer Shakir slightly, given how much more usable he'll probably be this week. But ultimately, I do see why you like Michael Wilson, and I could definitely see why holding him makes a lot of sense. Last question. Should I try and move some assets for a running back? Yeah, this type of general trade question is kind of useless. I can't really answer that. But yeah, I think you got okay backfield there, especially when Kyron comes. So I wouldn't be crazy, but if you can move Bijan with another player and get to true RB1 or a true wide receiver 1, I'd be selling on that name value. Yeah, let's go, Bulldog. Great to see you, man. Drop Schultz for McBride. I'd rather have McBride rest of the season. Yep. Drop Lawrence for Levis. That one's a little bit tougher. I don't believe in Levis enough to fully endorse that. I mean, hell, he might be the next huge thing. This might be like Herbert when he walked in and threw 4 touchdowns, like a 3-touchdown day, and just bombs away. Could be like that, Matt. I have less faith in the overall Titans offensive environment, though. I don't think we're getting 4 touchdowns every week. So I think you got to keep at least one of those guys for sure. Yeah, I saw he lost Dobbs, McBride, Tyler, but I just think it's a staple of this offense at this point. Have both Laporta and Kittle on bye. Do I go K-Dot or Chig? Oh, I mean, no Taysom, I'm guessing, Giuseppe. No McBride out there. None of those guys are there for you. I guess K-Dot, if these are your best options, but I got to think there's something better out there for you now. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Mike Clay. I really appreciate it, brother. Consistently tuned in. Couldn't pull off the upset of number 1 last week. Oh, no. Charlie, this is rough. Your team is solid, too. I don't know what's happening there, man. I feel like our predictions are on point for the most part this year. So hopefully we're not leading you astray. I'm sorry to hear that. You're as loyal as they come. I hope this turns around for you, man. It does start with 1 this week, though. That's absolutely true. You concerned about Tank Dell, maybe Noah Brown? I am a bit concerned. This was definitely a down week. I'm concerned with the passing attack in general. Nico Collins, CJ Stroud. Like, it's just, I don't know what's happening to it right now. So, yeah, you got to be concerned. I don't think Noah Brown's the number 2. I think that was a 1-week mirage. But I am concerned with just the passing expectations. And CJ Stroud, you have to be in a monster those first few weeks, Bulldog. Just seems to be taking a step back. And better bye-week filler, Tutu, Demario Douglas, or Mingo, or Chark. I would go Demario Douglas, Giuseppe, just because I think the volume will be there. And I think there's just a better path to longer-term upside, too, with him. So as a 1-week stream, you had a good matchup here with Washington, the most of points allowed to wide receivers right now by an insane clip. I forgot to even mention that with him. So as a 1-week rental, boom, that makes sense. But I also think he could develop into something that might be more than just a 1-week rental for you, too, Giuseppe. So I go Demario Douglas for sure there. All right, Wolfpack, that wraps up all our questions, all our pickups. On your way out, please consider, again, that thumbs up button if you haven't already hit it. If you're new here, catching the replay or live, would love to have you come back on here for another show. So consider hitting that subscribe button as well. You find all our written content at rotostreetjournal.com, including my rankings, rest of season, big board, all that good stuff. So come on down, check that out as well. Happy Halloween to all of you out there. And a wolf of fancy sheep, guys. Be that wolf. Later.